Welcome to Happy Talks with Dr. Alice and Donovan. Dr. Alice Fong is a holistic naturopathic doctor and founder of Amour de Soi Wellness. And Donovon Jenson is a software engineer and founder of HowToHappy.com. Together, they're out to cause more happiness in the world.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Happy Talks. My name is Dr. Alice, and this is my awesome co-host. And today we are talking about love. Love is important to have for ourselves as well as others. So Donovan, what are your initial thoughts when it comes to love, since we're coming into Valentine's Day?
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind is just how broadly the word can be used.
Yeah.
Right. So you can have like love in a romantic relationship, but I feel like it's different, but also the same as love, like for a family member or a friend, or like, like I feel like they all share something in common, but they're all kind of different. And maybe we'll tease it apart as we keep talking. But that's the first thing that comes to mind, is it's sort of like a word that has many uses, or like you can use it in a lot of different places, but it doesn't always exactly mean exactly the same thing.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. And actually, it just made me remember a time when I was doing City Year, which is like an AmeriCorps program, like a volunteer program, like over a decade ago. And one of the mentors or coaches was talking about the different types of love. There's like the familial love for your family. Then there's like the romantic love. He might have given it a different type of name. There's self-love, and then there's like agape love, which is like love for humanity, which is kind of one of the purposes of doing AmeriCorps. It's just like being of service to others. So yeah, we can kind of tease those apart, but which avenue would you like to explore first?
Well, with Valentine's Day coming up, let's tee off on romantic love to start, and then we'll see where the conversation goes.
Okay.
So I'm curious from your side, like what are some of the types or aspects that drive romantic love?
I think even in romantic love, there's differences or things to distinguish within romantic love, in that, like, I think initially I'm a person that doesn't really quite believe in love at first sight. I believe in lust at first sight. You can be very physically attracted to someone, but you don't really know them quite yet. And so although I describe with my husband that it was love at first conversation for me, and I was on our first date, which has never happened to me ever before on any first date. Love at first conversation, because we just really connected and had great chemistry and just really had just such synergy from that first date. But then there's like the maybe lust type of love, if you want to categorize that. But then there's I think you do, over time, the longer you are in a relationship, develop maybe something similar to a familial type of love, like a deep love, like almost they are your family in a sense. And maybe it's less like exciting. I don't know. But I think it's also can be very deep and profound in a different way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I mean, I think it's pretty common to talk about relationships in terms of like different phases, like sort of like puppy dog love, or like you're saying, like lust love, like this sort of initial attraction that to some degree is based on novelty, right? To some degree, it's like, whoa, this is a new person and we mesh in this way, and this is like unfamiliar, but also comfortable just in the way that we're able to interact. So like this feels really nice. And like you said, over time, as you unravel more and more of sort of like the person's actions or personality or whatever else, it sort of transforms into this other kind of love that's more based on, I feel like it's based on like, like a good baseline rapport, but also just having like a long history of interactions together, right? And I like you said, I do feel like it fits more in this like family camp, or maybe even sort of friendship camp, where it's just like we have a long list of shared experiences,
right?
And hopefully there's like some sort of baseline in terms of like interactions that is also positive. But I feel like spending a ton of time with someone you like to start with can sort of like build that chemistry and develop that sort of relationship.
Yeah, definitely. And another thing that I just thought of when it comes to love and how, I've had various relationships through my life, and I feel like the love, my degree and capacity to love has shifted through relationships based on my own personal development. Because I realized I was looking back on my relationships and that I was very insecure in my 20s and I didn't have a lot of self-love. And even though I felt like I was in love with various people, looking back compared to where I am now, it's just like I don't want to say it wasn't quality love, but it wasn't like as deep or profound as I thought, because it was like I was more wanting that love because I was lacking in love for myself, if that makes sense. And versus like as I did more personal development and therapy and self discovery work, I kind of developed more self love. So I feel like because I had developed myself more by the time I met my husband, like my capacity to love was just like expanded because I had more self love. I had more agape love for humanity. And so I feel like I was just in a different emotional development state to be able to like tell him I love him and like within 11 days of meeting him, which has never happened either. Before I felt like it would take me several months, maybe even longer, to get there. But I think it was not necessarily, I mean, yeah, he played a big part of it, but I think the bigger part was me working on myself to expand my capacity to love another person by expanding my capacity to love myself.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting angle for us to walk down. I've had sort of a similar experience of sort of an evolution of my definition of love over
Yeah.
time,
Mm-hmm.
where like I've had specifically one past relationship I can think of where I thought, was sort of like love, but I wouldn't define it as that now
Yeah.
because the way that I was showing love or experiencing love was way more sort of like you said, insecure. For
Mm-hmm.
me, it was a lot more possessive and controlling, and not in terms of I was acting those things out, not in terms of I was saying like you can't do this, you can't do
Yeah.
that, but in terms of I was internalizing so much of the other person's actions.
Mm-hmm.
And when things didn't go the way I wanted them to or were out of my control, I
Yeah.
was way more frustrated.
Yeah.
And now I feel like sort of like you said, with like more development, more time, more thought, um, my definition of love has changed quite a bit in a way that like, in the past I would have thought that if someone broke up with me, for example,
Mm-hmm.
there's no way there could be love in the relationship. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
now I feel like it's the version or definition of love I have is much more encompassing and less like
Yeah.
tight, right? Like I feel like I used to just like grasp so tightly onto how things were supposed to be exactly. And I mean, it probably contributed to, not probably, it definitely contributed to those relationships not working out.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like over time, as I've gotten just like a more realistic or useful relationship with the idea of love,
Mm-hmm.
not only is it more effective just for like the actual relationships I'm developing, but I feel way better. I feel
Yeah.
way, way, way better. And I feel way more able to sort of like internally project goodwill out to other people
Mm-hmm.
without having some sort of anchor on specific expectations like, oh, they should act this way or this should happen or all those kinds of things that used to really trip me up in the past.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I can really relate to that experience, especially the part about like really grasping and gripping love like so tight and wanting it like, so much. And I've definitely had plenty of unrequited love experiences. But again, I was like, I wasn't, I mean, I felt like I was in love, but maybe it was the need for love that made me push harder, which probably pushed them away more. So it was just like this dance and back and forth degree, which I could definitely relate.
Well, I also found, I don't know if this is the same for you, I'd be curious, but I also found over time that things that I would have previously labeled as love or thought were love, I would no longer do. So
Mm,
like not recently, but there's been times that I've just like met people that I have like a really good interaction with, or
mhm.
like set of interactions with, and like we click on a good level and whatever else. And like at one point in time, that would have been like, cool, we're
Yeah,
like 90% of the way to like what I'm gonna
right.
call love.
Yeah.
And now like that's just not, that's just not how I think about it. You know,
Mm,
like it's like, oh, like I'm getting excited to
yeah,
meet someone who I'm, or like to have met someone that I mesh with well.
right.
That doesn't mean, like you're saying, it doesn't, that's not necessarily a good indicator of like, cool, this is it. This is the perfect matchup. Like things are gonna go well from here on,
Yeah.
no matter how much of this person I learn about.
Mhm.
But like over time it's sort of been like more and more parsing out like, yeah, it's not necessarily love, but there is like a great excitement for meeting people that you mesh with well.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. What do you think is when you're starting a new relationship, might not be love right away, but it's like when do you cross like a threshold from like I'm really liking this person to no, now I love this person. And I'm just trying to tease that out in my own head um of what made the difference. I'll use my own current relationship as the example of well, part of the reason why I said I love you so fast, and I had no expectation of him saying it back, like, and I didn't need that. That was like another difference of like, oh, I need you to love me back ASAP. It was like, no, this is the feeling I'm having. I'm gonna say it, I know super early. And you could say it whenever you feel it, if that ever happens. But the thing that kind of like propelled me to say it so quickly in this particular relationship, and we've been together for 4.5 years now, is I got strep throat like really, really early on in our relationship. I felt like I was dying because my throat, I could like barely eat, I could barely sleep, I was miserable. And even though I'm a doctor, it didn't occur to me. I was like, oh, this is just a really bad cold. And then, my partner was like, oh, I had something like this, like strep throat. And I was like, oh my God, this is strep throat. And I was like, why didn't it occur to me? Probably because I haven't slept or ate. And so it occurred to me, like, yeah, I really need antibiotics. And so he was so kind and caring enough to take me to like this revelation happened at like late at night. So trying to go to like a 24-hour pharmacy late at night, as well as getting my doctor, who I happen to have her cell phone number. So texted her like really late at night to get a prescription. And he took care of me. And so it was just like early on, because I felt like I was on the brink of death, even though I wasn't really, but it felt like I was dying. Once I started to recover and feel better from taking the antibiotics, like pretty much within like 8 hours of taking it, I was like 80% better. I was like, yeah, I this is what I'm feeling, so I'm gonna say it because of the care and consideration for me while I was going through a really difficult time was the thing that kind of propelled me to say the words probably quicker than I normally have. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I'm not going to answer your question right now because I have a different train of thought in my head.
Okay, sure.
But I feel like there is a set of sort of things that have to sort of like come together to make up love, right? Or to make it like feel like love. And I feel like I mentioned this before, but sort of like a baseline rapport, just like being able to communicate in a way that like you feel like the other person understands you and like you can make progress on issues. Because I've had interactions with people or like dates or whatever, and I'm trying to talk to them, and I'm just like I don't know what's going on, but like we can't even talk.
Yeah.
So I feel like some sort of baseline rapport, but then I feel like kind of what you were saying, like asking about when does like start to feel like love or whatever. I feel like whenever you have those bigger moments of trust or
Mhm.
like bigger moments of
Yeah.
need of help or just like
Mhm.
whatever, right? Just a time that sort of the relationship has, I don't want to call it a test. It's not really a test,
Yeah.
but it's just like moments of, I don't know, hardship. We'll just call it that. It's not really what I want to use. I want to use better words, but it's fine. I don't have them.
Okay.
Anyway, like I feel like the bigger those are that are successful, the more likely it is to like deepen the relationship.
Mhm.
So you need to pair that with some other things, right? Like there needs to be like a rapport, there needs to be like an attraction of some kind. Like you can't just have somebody help you through a hard time if you're not attracted to them, and then you're like, oh, I'm in love with this person, because you won't be.
Right.
But I feel like that's one of the key factors, is like when these events happen, that you like rely on the other person. There we go. There's some words that actually make sense to what I want to say. But like
Yes.
as you are able to rely on them and build trust, then I feel like if you have those other things, that's when you can sort of like develop, like the relationship starts to develop into something that like is on a love wavelength instead of something lower, you know. And I also feel like over time,
Mhm.
that's sort of one of the things that I had to learn, which is like I would have these other things like, oh, here's like a physical attraction. Oh, here's like a baseline of rapport. Oh shit, actually I can't trust this person. They suck. Like,
Yeah, that
oh
changes.
wait, I relied on them and like it didn't work out.
Yeah.
But you know, before I had more nuance in my head, like I would get so caught up in those other pieces, I would forget or like not pay attention to developing out the whole, I don't know, suite of sort of characteristics that I need for it to actually be, like you were saying, like genuine or deep love, like a real something that can last.
Right. Yeah. No, definitely. I think there has to be more than physical attraction, and I think you like hit the nail on the head kind of with the trust is absolutely critical, and I'm just recognizing how vital it is, because I think with trust comes the ability to be more vulnerable, and that kind of expands the capacity for love too, and deepen love too. And I think like love can vary in degrees through a relationship, and can grow and become deeper, or it can fizzle out potentially too, is another thing that happens. And I think that's the other thing, it's like keep mentioning on this podcast how I watch Married at First Sight once in a while, and one of the like experts talks about, love isn't necessarily a thing that just like hits you all of a sudden and it's like, bing, I'm in love. It's like he talks about, we grow in love, and that can develop over time, and that can deepen over time. And it's like, how do you maybe not say like, oh, I fell in love, like you just accidentally like fell in a puddle. Like it doesn't always happen like that. It's like built and grown, and like that's how trust happens, is like it builds and grows, and then love can unfold out of being willing to be more vulnerable with your heart because you are trusting of that person.
Yeah, and I think on a related note, that's why it's so hard for relationships to recover from
Mm,
anything that's a breach of trust. You know,
yeah,
something like cheating, but there are other
yeah,
things that can be a breach of trust.
definitely.
And I feel like, you know, the earlier on it is, the less likely it is that you can recover from it, because it's
Mhm.
like, cool, we
Right.
don't have like a long history or a long series of times that I could trust you and things went okay.
Yeah.
But I do also think that's why you can find relationships that like lasted for a very long time, and then there was like one instance of cheating or one instance of like
Mhm.
breaking trust in some way, and
Yeah.
then they're able to like figure it out. I'm not saying that that's good or bad or right or wrong or whatever,
Yeah.
but like I think that's just part of the mechanics of it, is like if you have had a huge wall of trust to pull from and then like it gets broken, you might have a better chance of being able to recover some of it. But I also think that's why a ton of relationships can't recover, because once you can't trust someone,
Mhm.
I just feel like it's so hard to have like you can still love them, but it's
Right.
almost impossible to have like a healthy version of that, or
Yeah.
like a way that the relationship can be maintained.
Mhm.
And I'm fairly confident that any relationship that does survive some sort of broken trust like that has to rebuild the trust. There's no
Oh,
way
yeah.
that you can just sit in like a healthy relationship and not trust your significant other.
Yeah. No, that can really be damaging over time. And yeah, it takes time to rebuild the trust, but if two people are committed to that process, then it's possible to recover from things like that. But you mentioned something else earlier that I wanted to touch on a little deeper. Even if the relationship ends, like you can still have love for that person. That's like something that's possible. That's something I've learned too, that my last relationship before my current relationship, there was still a lot of love. We ended on good terms, there was still a lot of love when we ended, but it was just that we had different values in life that broke us. So it wasn't like, oh, he cheated on me or he was a dick or something like that. It was just like we have fundamental life value differences, and it doesn't make sense for us to be together anymore, even though we love each other deeply. So I think that was a really important point to make. But then there's also the thing about like loving someone who's really not good for you. And I think that kind of comes from like, I think that's where a person might need to explore their own insecurities a little more if they're constantly like continuing to love someone and even maybe staying in a very unhealthy relationship because they love them so much, but maybe it's actually because they feel like they are incapable of getting love again, maybe if the relationship ends, or maybe they feel like no one else will love them if it ends. So that's something to kind of be mindful of.
Yeah. I feel like that's a very important topic that I will try to wade into, but may not have great expertise. But I do feel like it's very common for people to sort of have a type of love that is not necessarily healthy. You know, like they feel like they have strong feelings of affection towards someone. And I
Yeah.
totally get that, and that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I feel like media has made it extra bad to think like, oh, like you should have, like, if you have love or feel love, then you should be willing to do whatever or put up with whatever or just sort of sacrifice anything. And it's often not a healthy way to look at things.
Yeah.
You know, it can definitely get people stuck in places where their overall quality of life is not good, or at least a lot lower than it could or should be.
Yeah.
And I feel like that sort of, I guess I'll just call it a myth or narrative of just like, oh, love above everything is so unhelpful.
Agreed. Yeah, I think we're both in the mindset that, love isn't necessarily enough to sustain a relationship. If like, you love each other deeply, even if it's mutual, like shared deep love. Again, it's like maybe your values are different, or maybe there's fundamental differences that just don't make you a good match in many ways. And that's like something you have to be willing to, because it's not really great. I mean, you can love them, but if you're resenting them because they're not ever going to get on board with like whatever you want out of life, then yeah, that's not necessarily a healthy thing to have like endless resentment, but endless love. It's just like, yeah, that's going to hurt the relationship over time.
Yeah, because I think it's one thing to make sort of a measured compromise, right?
Yeah.
There are instances where it's like, hey, this person does this thing. I don't necessarily want to do that, but I do value this relationship more than this other thing. If it's measured like that and it's sort of a calculated decision, that's one thing. But there are way, way more instances of like, I want to stay with this person, but I want them to be different too.
Right, yes.
And like that's just not a good recipe for getting the most out of life. And I feel like one of the biggest problems is people get into these relationships, they get stuck in sort of a limbo state where it's like, I'm not really getting what I want out of life, but also I don't want to leave this situation.
Right.
And you can end up with those stories of people who've been together, like 20, 30 years. And then one day one of them just is like, I'm so done with this. And just like gives up and like completely changes their life and has like a whole, 180 on everything they're doing or whatever else. And obviously it's way easier said than done. But if you sort of know that the relationship is not working for you, continuing to just sit in it doesn't do much for you. And it's also possible the other person is in the same boat. So you're both just sitting in like a subpar, like, oh man, like this is kind of working, but it's kind of not forever when there's probably better options out there.
Yeah, definitely. So, and I think it kind of comes back to this idea of like, if you are just staying in a relationship because there's love, but there's fundamental, like big differences that really don't make you a good match. I think that comes down, kind of circles back around to not having enough self-love to have the boundaries to walk away, because you're not going to get what you really want out of that relationship. Even though you love that person, it's not going to be what he or she is not going to be able to give you what you want out of life. So having enough self-love to walk away, I think, is really important, which is something I was lacking for many relationships, of just having enough self-love as well as self-respect to walk away when I should have, like, before it really went downhill. It's like, or just like allowing myself to be treated in a way that wasn't as ideal. Not like abuse or anything, but just like not being respected in the way that I feel like I should now. And being able to like have enough self-love and self-respect to be like, yeah, I don't deserve this type of treatment. And yeah, I'm going to walk away because I love myself more. And it's kind of unfortunate. Like, actually, I just remembered the like Sex in the City line where Samantha, like, who, has been with her share of partners through the series, but she does fall in love with this one guy, but he cheats on her. And then she gives him another chance. But then she's like super paranoid because she's afraid that he's going to cheat on her again. And so she's like stalking him and like following him around, trying to like see if he's going to do it again. And then she finally like has it up to here, and she says like, I love you, but I love me more, and I can't do this anymore. And so she walks away, and that takes something. It's really hard, but it's that self-love that's important to give you the ability to walk away when it's needed.
Yeah, on a similar note, I feel like, some people are trapped in this bucket of they're not being treated in the way that they want to be, and they need to walk away from it.
Yeah.
I feel like there's another similar bucket of people who get stuck sort of thinking like, this relationship isn't working for me for whatever reason, but I don't want to leave this person because I love them, or like I don't want them to feel bad, and they're like putting the other person's emotions and feelings above theirs. But I feel like when you're in either of those sort of positions, you can't bring your full self to the relationship. Like, you can't, like, something will still be missing, even if the other person thinks or feels, for the most part, like, oh, things are going well. Like, there will still be sort of this missing piece, and I feel like it still comes out, at least in like the relationships I've seen. And maybe it's harder when you're actually in it, but like as a third party,
yeah,
I feel like sometimes I've seen relationships where I'm just like, I don't know, like the vibe here is not right, or like there's some sort of nuance here that's just like things aren't meshing correctly. And like, I feel like it may feel like you're sparing the other person in some way. Again, this isn't like more examples where like they're not like mistreating you necessarily, but it's just not for whatever reason not working out. Like,
right.
You may feel like you're sort of like sparing them or like doing something for them because you love them, but I just feel like overall, like, those things will still leak out, and like those resentments or whatever else will still build, and like it will still cause problems down the line by staying more than actually taking the space that you need or finding something else that's a better fit.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, I think we covered this topic pretty well. Were there any other avenues you wanted to explore before we wrap up this topic of love today?
No, I think that pretty much covers it. It's just, it's fairly nuanced. It's not something that you can just say like, oh, this is what love is. Done.
Right. Yeah.
There's a lot of details around it to sort of like sift through to figure out exactly what you mean and what you need and all that.
Yeah. But I think the thing I want to like leave with people is just, with love, you are risking your heart and you are risking getting hurt. But ultimately, I think if you have enough self-love, it's worth it to put yourself out there and risk falling in love, because it's a great thing, but you also have to love yourself first. So those are my final words. All right. So that's it for today. We appreciate you. And if you appreciate us, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and help spread the happiness in the world. We'll see you next time. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like it and then go and subscribe to my channel and ring the bell so you get notified when the next video comes out. And if you check out in the description below, go to my website where you can get my free fast and easy guide to stress relief. Thanks again for checking us out, and we'll see you next time.